This is Rugby Unity. I am David Pembroke, and on today's program, Zimbabwe through to the Rugby World Cup in 2027 as the champions of Africa, having beaten Namibia 30 points to 28 in the final of the Rugby Africa Championship. Alan Gilpin, the Chief Executive Officer of World Rugby, announces an investment of $275 million in rugby in the United States over the next 5 to 6 years. The South African under-20s take the title over New Zealand, 23 points to 15. But first, the British and Irish Lions test match against Australia. And in my humble opinion, the Wallabies were terrible. They were passive. They were flat. They didn't get into the game, and it was very difficult watching from an Australian point of view. After the match, Joe Schmidt said there was enough there to give him belief, but Ewan McKenzie, are you a believer?
Well, having been in exactly the same situation some 20 years ago, yes, I'm a believer. You can do a lot in a week. But it was an interesting game. I mean, the Lions started, I think, how we suggested. They started with a short kick-off, got 3 points from that. Quick line-outs, kept the tempo of the game up. Suddenly they're up 10-0, and you're chasing on the scoreboard. So they had the scoreboard working for them all game. So, they did well. And I think they put Australia off their stride. In the end, Australia came back into it playing a very direct sort of pick and drive and quite direct game, which there's some opportunity there, I guess. But, it'll be a busy week in the Wallaby camp.
But how much credence can you give to the sort of 50th minute comeback when the Lions seemed to sort of relax and sort of didn't seem to bring the same sort of intensity? And really, for most of the match, they weren't really at the standard that you would expect of a Lions team as well.
I wouldn't say that. I think the guys coming off the bench for the Lions, they've got a point to prove. You know, they wanted to be in the starting 15, so I don't think anyone's going out there to, it's a slightly different scenario. Although I would expect a lift in performance. I think Australia, for me, played far more direct. There was a lot more pick and drive. And the difference for me at the moment is that the Lions are a very good defensive team. They get in their faces and do that. But when there's pick and drive going on, they're not so good at getting over the ball and creating that turnover situation or slowing the ball without discipline coming into play. And I think there was a period there was 5 or 6 penalties in a row by the Lions, and all Australia was doing was just punching sort of one out close to the ruck. And then with the change in halfback, they've got a bit more direct play as well. So there's opportunity there. They're not, as I said in the last discussion, they're not as focused on spending time on the ball. They probably let go and get out of the contest and look for the defensive line quicker than the Australian team does. And hence why I was talking about the two on-ballers maybe as an opportunity. Now I think there's some strategy options there for Australia, but it's a bit of a change from what they did in the first game.
But were you surprised at how slowly the Australians started? You know, a 4-week preparation, plenty of time to get it right. We've known for years that this was going to be the big occasion, and I just felt that the Australians let it pass them.
Yeah, but the first kickoff, where did it go? It was a short kickoff straight down the field, right? Everyone's been kicking off to the sidelines, kicking off deep left, deep right, and they kick off short, and they milk a penalty, bang, 3 points. That's a psychological blow straight up in the first minute of the game. So they took that mental space which we talked about last week. They grabbed that, and then they just built from there. They had the scoreboard working for them the whole game. Yes, Australia caught up, but to be fair, the Lions had some opportunities they missed in the first half too, so they could have been another 2 tries up.
Eddie Jones, what about your view? Are you as positive as Ewan McKenzie?
Well, I think Australia showed enough they can nab a test, right? And to stay in the series, it's got to be the next one. But they're going to have to play differently. I think, as Ewan said, the Lions got into their stride early. And when you get in the stride early and you're on the back foot, it looks like you're underprepared and lacking energy, but that's not the case. You know, I think Australia were well prepared. They were ready for the game. But the Lions took the opportunity early, created some points. And they're powerful, the Lions, around the ruck. And that's where I think Australia needs to, as we've discussed, try to break the game up a little bit. Because if it's a nice structured game, Australia can't win. I'd say that quite definitely. Australia cannot win that sort of game. But if the game breaks up a little bit, which it did in the last 10, 15 minutes of the game, but it always strikes me when a team does that at the end of the game, what Bob Dwyer used to say to us. He said, it takes no courage to win the game when it's lost. And that's true, and that's true. But they kept in the game, they kept fighting, and I think they found a way that could be effective to break up the Lions' defence. Because as Ewan said, the strengths of the Lions is their defence. They get off the line hard, they hit in twos. They have that short contest at the breakdown. They have numbers on their feet. They very rarely get stripped for numbers in defence.
Okay, so let's go to this week. Both of you, probably a question for you first, Eddie, in this type of week, what sort of insights can you give people about how the Wallabies will be preparing this week, and then indeed how the Lions might be preparing this week, having had the results that they've had? Let's start with the Wallabies.
Well, the first thing is it's a consequence game. There's a consequence to the result of the game. You're either in the series or you're out of the series. So, that gives it a bit more edge. They'll probably talk about that at the start of the week. What do we got to do? How can we get off to a better start? Where were the opportunities we missed? There'll be a bit more tension in the air for the Australian boys because they know they've got to win this game, and that always adds a bit more to it, either in a positive or sometimes it could be a negative way that adds pressure. And it'll come down to, Joe's a very experienced coach, Wilson's captain, his relationship with Wilson, how they can build the team. And then selection's the other big thing, mate, start of the week, who's going to be in, who's going to be out. Because as soon as you lose a game like that, players who have had average games looking over their shoulders, and you don't want too much of that going on at the start of the week.
Mm. And you, Ewan, what would you be doing if you were in charge of the Wallaby team heading into this match? As Eddie Jones says, it's a consequence test match.
Yeah, well, you're gonna analyse it and look for all the things that you could have done better, but there'll be things there that statistically or otherwise Australia did well, but they lacked a bit of cohesion. There was a couple of times their line that looked a little bit lost in terms of the pattern of the game. So you think some of those things would iron out with another opportunity because it was a different combination than they played the week before. Selection's critical. I spend a lot of time on selections because that's, you have to make the selections logical. So you can have a knee-jerk reaction. I don't think Schmidt will do that. But, the easy things is, we'll drop a few people and whatever. There has to be some logic as to who you're bringing in and for what reason. So that'll go to the strategy of the game. I think Eddie's just mentioned about how good their defence is. You're going to have to play inside that defence a little bit. So the pick and drive was quite effective for them later in the game. The short side's always a good opportunity too. If the defensive line's set to play back to the short side, so you need to have the nine carrying the ball is going to be a priority. And then it's a question of how much ball you kick away versus perhaps a keepings off type game where you don't give them the ball and see how disciplined they are. That's the other thing. If you give them the ball, they look pretty good. So if you keep the ball off them, then maybe that's an opportunity to milk some penalties and bring some discipline issues into play. So you've got to work out a way to do that. But I think they've got the players to do that if they want to play that way.
But that was the solution that both you and Eddie designed on this program last week, and the Australians really didn't keep the ball away from them, and some of the kicking was not particularly strategic and it was not particularly effective, weren't able to find the grass, did kick the ball back to them on plenty of occasions.
Well, we talked about tempo last week, like playing upbeat, trying to grab the mental side of the game, speeding the game up and trying to put them. But they did exactly that to us in the first 10 or 15 minutes. So you need to look probably elsewhere and try and change it up a bit. You've got to present something different, and maybe a few new players might be able to provide something different there. It's going to be very subtle, and you can only do so much in a week. You've got, 3 training sessions tops, really, and probably only 2 where you can really develop anything before you do any repetition of whatever that's going to be. So, we saw one good scrum play where they changed direction. That looked interesting. The scrum for me in the game is a bit of a non-event at the moment. The referee blew free kicks on the first 3 or 4, I think, so there was no contest, and then the rest of it played out. So the line-out's an opportunity to create pressure, so it depends on who they pick, as whether they can generate some pressure on the lines that way. But short side, picking or mix the game up, but giving them the ball doesn't seem to be a good idea.
So listen, you two have spent many years picking teams at the highest level. Bring us into a conversation. If you two could have a conversation now and pick your Wallaby team for this weekend.
Eddie can start.
There's probably 2 things I'd look at. I reckon, and it's almost a contradiction to what we said last week, and coaching's a lot about contradiction. So I as we said last week, they need to play tempo, but I think their opportunities to win the game is almost like just attacking around the ruck, through the ruck, and down the short side. So I'd bring Will Skelton, the best forward in the world around that area. One of the best forwards in the world is Skelton, because he can stay on his feet. He's got good footwork. He can get a half offload. He gets his head and shoulders through. So I'd pick him, and then I'd find a way to get Sua'ali'i in space. You think if it was a salary cap, right? You'd have a look at Australia's salary cap. They're 2 highest paid players. One's not even in the 23 Tupou, right? And the other bloke hardly touches the ball. And he's a rugby league player, Sua'ali'i, so he needs the ball early. It looks like he doesn't enjoy getting the ball close to the line, which most league players don't, because that's not how the game's played. They like the ball early. They like to get the ball with some time and space to take on their opposite number. And the one time he got the ball reasonably early, he got the try disallowed where he ran over the top of the Lions' back row, and that's what you want to see him more doing. I'd be setting him up to run over the top of Finn Russell. Give him the ball early, run over the top of Finn Russell, see what damage he can do. Like, we've got this guy who's a physical beast, and we're not seeing any of it. So I'd bring him in. I'd create players around him getting in the game early and running at Finn Russell, and then using Skelton down the short side. So they'd be the 2 selection, and everything else around. The front row, I don't think you can make much change there. They got outpowered in the front row, but Alatoa and Slipper, they get through plenty of work. You need one of the faster locks, Frost or Williams. And the back row, I tend to go with Link's idea of having 2 open sides, like really contest the breakdown. Particularly, it's Italian referee, isn't it, for this game?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, he's a bit iffy around there. So, I'd be bringing into the game make everything a contest. So they'd be the big ones for me, and the rest of it's pretty as you go, mate.
You and McKenzie.
Yeah, I don't disagree with Eddie. I think Pollard and Bell have got, they do good things with it. They can carry the ball into the opposition line. They can bend the line, both those guys. So I think you need a little bit of that. If you're going to play in close around the ruck and short, so those guys will give you good value. I think the back row the same, the 2 on ballers. And then, obviously you've got to win line out, so that if you play Skelton, then you've got to think about the line out as well, so it gets a bit more. But the line outs these days are pretty. There's no contest from the opposition. You can get ball pretty well, so that'll be a tactical battle in itself. It always is. But I think in the backs, Eddie makes a good point. Sua'ali'i needs to be able to get the ball in space. We don't. If you look back over the years, I think I said it last week, we haven't had really passing midfield. So there's not a lot of opportunities for guys just getting the ball. The wingers don't get the ball classically. They'll get the ball kicked to them, but they don't get the ball passed out the back line too often. So we've got to find ways to get Sua'ali'i in space, and there are other guys too there. And I think a running 9. I mean, Gordon can do that, but maybe there's an opportunity there for McDermott to start. Just to try and change the tempo of the game as well, and he can probably feed that short side attack and the shorter game by running himself, as he'll mix it up a bit better.
So, Eddie, would you start with Tate McDermott?
Yeah, I like that idea. McDermott at 9. I'd almost go for Bell, Pollard, and I'd bring Tupou back, mate, at tight end. Just go, because you got to go balls out this game, and you got to back yourself to win a certain way. And he might only play 30 minutes for you.
Yeah, but he might do right, because one thing. Well, Tupou, he can carry in close. Okay, he's been up and down in form this year, but where you are right now, he'll give you a solid scrum, but he likes to carry the ball, and he likes those, just off the ruck. He'd be perfect in that situation, just to get us across the advantage line. He's a good try sneak. He's a guy that can find the try line. So, if you're going to go all in on that strategy, then he'd be someone who would suit that.
All right. So if that's Australia, what do the Lions do? How do they prepare this week, and what sort of team do they pick this weekend?
I don't think that they'll change a lot. It seems to be working for them. They'll obviously look at the second half and sort of see what. I mean, the opportunity. The worry for them is that if a team plays pick and drive against them, that they're not so good at being able to get in there and stopping that without conceding a penalty of some description, or trying to slip around the side or whatever. So I think there's a real opportunity to put some pressure on. So that might go to back row composition. We talked about Jack Morgan, but they've played well, so I wouldn't expect that they'll change too much.
Eddie, would you change anything?
Well, I'd probably have a look at Chesham to come in for McCarthy. McCarthy was reasonably quiet. He's been good for Ireland, but the Lions games are another step up from your normal Test match, and maybe Chesham might just give him a bit more physical presence around that ruck area. The other thing I'd go for, Conan, I thought was steady, but I'd bring Jack Morgan in, particularly with the Italian referee. Contest Harden, move Curry back to 8. And, the 8 position now, basically, the 8 used to be a key man in terms of the scrum. Now the halfback picks the ball out of the second row. So the number 8 has very little control of the ball. And particularly the way Ewan was alluding to, the way the referees are refereeing the contest. If you're a weak scrummaging side now, the referee's petrified of penalising you. So he penalised... because he thought Australia's scrum was going to be compromised, so he wanted to take the contest out of it. So he penalised, guessed that Gens hinged at least once or twice. I can't remember. It was at least once early in the game. So he took the contest out of the scrum, and I've seen that happen increasingly more and more recently in Test matches. They're so petrified of having a scrum game. They take the contest out of the scrum. And I think that'll be the case with the Italian bloke as well. So the real contest will be in the air and on the ground, and particularly on the ground this week, I think.
Did you feel that either side got an advantage with the referee?
Well, I did pick up we talked about speeding the game up. I picked up that the referee was not allowing huddles at the line out in the second half. He was trying to speed the game up and telling there's no huddles. I picked it up on the commentary, but whether that was consistently applied, I don't know. No, I think the captains handled it all right. I don't think there was anything specific. I mean, he refereed how he normally referees, so I didn't see much there. I was disappointed that the scrum was taken out of the game, and if the Lions do anything, they could look to what the Springboks do. the Springboks every scrum, first scrum on their ball, they go second shove, milk a penalty, kick down. They got a line out drive. It's the same formula. So the first scrum of the game for the Lions, they might try and assert themselves on their put-in and see if they can get some reward that way. That would be an opportunity. Australia could try and do the same thing depending on how they pick the team. So there's still some strategy opportunities in those spaces.
What did you think of the performance of the young Australian captain, Harry Wilson?
Yeah, I've seen him play a lot of football, and he's a very skillful player. But and he played again. He demonstrated his skills in the game with his kicks and things like that. But sometimes you need more than that. The game, we needed to get across the advantage line. We needed to be doing that. So there are other players that can maybe do that. Sometimes I feel like he drifts into other roles in the game, and he can do that quite well, and that works, and it works at Super Rugby. But yeah, at Test level, you need your number 8 to be leading from the front and getting us across the advantage line. And I don't recall him carrying the ball as much as he normally does, but that was the problem for Australia. The way they had the team set up, you needed him to be getting guys like him to be getting us across the advantage line. We didn't really get there till late in the game.
Eddie, what was your assessment of Harry Wilson and his performance?
Well, he ran a beautiful line really early in the game, the first 10 minutes of the game. I think he got it off liner, 2-pass play, ran inside shoulder. They got a quick ball and they were away the same way. I think the pass got knocked down on a sort of a loop play following that. But you want to see more of that where he's literally off the back fence carrying hard. He runs a good little inside shoulder, and as Ewan said, didn't see a lot of that. Like, you get a turnover ball, you're behind by 12 points. I think it was 12 points. You got Sua'ali'i outside you in big space, and you kick the ball into touch. Right? So now you give the Lions exactly what they want, a line out outside the 22. They set up a maul, they box kick, they're back into their tempo. So there's those bits of his game that he still needs to tidy up, but he's really improved as a player. But he's a great ball carrier. You want to see him carrying more.
Yeah, no, I agree with Eddie. I mean, everyone's watched him develop over the years, and I just think that getting that balance right, he probably carried a lot more a few years back, probably carried too much, so that became predictable. But he's got fantastic ball skills. Like for a forward, he's got exceptional ball skills. It's a matter of choosing the moment. I think that the moment that Eddie talked about, the kick in, that was it looked nice and all that, but in the end, you just gave possession to the Lions in a scenario that they were comfortable with. Plus, they got a breather. You have a line out so everyone walks over and everyone catches their breath, so there's no stress. We needed to keep that ball in and keep the pressure on them.
After the match, Joe Schmidt was very quick to say that both Skelton and Valentini trained well on the Saturday morning, and clearly they'll be an inclusion. We've spoken about Skelton, but how important will Valentini be this weekend? Eddie Jones.
Well, it depends on that composition of the back row. If you go for two contesters like McGrath, who was pretty quiet in the game, I thought. He had that one steal at the start of the game, but then you didn't see much of him. He struggled to get in the game. And I thought, if you look at the Lions pack, I thought Genge, Furlong and Curry were absolutely outstanding. They were in every contest, competed hard, and Genge and Furlong's carrying was a real difference between the two teams. And McGrath only really got a turnover on the back of Furlong beating a tackle and getting isolated close to the line, which very rarely happens. So you want to see more of him. Valentini's obviously a good, strong player. It's how you get that combination right in the back row.
Ewan?
Yeah, exactly that. I think Valentini's probably always been probably our most consistent player over the last few years. So, sort of almost like first pick type player. If you're going to play that back row, you're going to get some interesting dynamics. So you can definitely bend the line, but then you might have to look at how you play your line outs and whatever. But there's a way to do things, and so I wouldn't rule anything out. I mean, I'll give you an example. When we played Scotland in the World Cup in 2003, I was the assistant coach, and Eddie gave me a forward pack with, I think Scotland had 5 guys over 2 metres tall, and we had George Smith and Phil Waugh and I think Todd Eye, and I had to find a way to win lineouts in that game, which we did, but there was hard work when you're competing against 5 guys who are over 2 metres tall. So there are ways, and that's where tempo and all sorts of things you can do to try and do that, but you've got to, you've got to work out what the total strategy is, and you just got to make sure you sort that out, and that's what the assistant coaches have got to do. Come up with a solution. You can't shy away from the best total selection strategy because of one sector. You've got to make that sector work, and that might be game specific. Specific to that game, you've got to come up with a different set of circumstances at line out. So just to make sure you're getting possession, or you don't kick the ball out.
How did you think the Australian line-out performed? Because there are a couple of bad throws, but whether they were a bad throw or a bad jump, I don't know. But certainly the outcome was not so good.
Yeah, well, it's every game's like that. You're hoping you're going to win 100%. It's hard when you're playing against quality players, and if they're prepared to lift in defence, that's just the nature of the contest. It's a contest within the game. So they did it right. They had enough possession, but I think you've got to keep revising that, because they'll do their homework. The Lions will do their homework on what happened in the first test and say, okay, so you need to make the second test look a fair bit different to the first test. Otherwise, it's going to be more of the same.
So the match will be played at the MCG, which is not your traditional sort of rugby stadium. It's obviously 100,000 plus. It's a round shape. Obviously, the rugby field sits in the middle, but it has different proportions. Obviously, it has a different feel about it. You've both prepared teams over many years to play at the MCG. So as coaches, how do you think about the MCG, and how is it different to, for example, preparing a team to play at Suncorp? Eddie Jones, we'll start with you.
Well, the cricket pitch always has a factor in it. It can be quite slippery. And Melbourne at that time of the year, I would imagine Lincoln know better than me, there'd be a bit of dew on the ground. So the pitch might be a bit slippery, which you got to factor that in and try to get some practice in those sort of conditions and make the players aware of it. Appropriate spikes, appropriate length spikes for all the players. We've seen wingers who can go out there and not have the appropriate spikes on and slip over. So you just got to be prepared for it, mate. It's different because you got 2 different levels of turf. You got your normal pitch, and then you got the cricket pitch, which can be slippery.
Ewan?
Yeah, it's a big ground, so the crowd's further away. So the reference, particularly for kickers, the reference points are different. So the crowd sits much further away. You've got to go there and practice your kicking and things like that, because you tend to think you got more option, and kicking it out in the fulls, is a risk in that game. There's also a camber on the field, so it runs away. So if you're playing in the Hurricanes or someone in Wellington, they're playing the All Blacks in Wellington, the old North Sydney Oval, they were different games when you play on them, because the way the ground sits in the middle, and so it's difficult. So teams that play in that environment a lot will handle it better. I don't think the Lions would have played on too many ovals, I don't think, off the top of my head. So no. So hopefully Australia spends a bit of time there and thinks that through.
So you're suggesting there that the kicking game becomes more important because of the camber of the field?
Well, the tactical kickers in the game, if they're looking for space and looking for opportunities to get the ball back, you can roll. It's easier to roll the ball into touch, but it's also harder to see where the touch line is, because you haven't got the traditional fence lines and the boundaries that you're used to. So that's just something you've got to take into account. And when you're at the ground, maybe even more than just the captain's run, you've got to spend a bit of time there just practicing, seeing how the ball rolls and whatever when you kick it. Yeah.
Eddie Jones, how would that change your tactics playing at the MCG?
No, I wouldn't, mate. I wouldn't.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's just being aware of the conditions, and as Ewan said, if you can get a training run in there, which is hard now, because the AFL don't want rugby teams on the pitch. So that's difficult. You get your captain's run, which is 20 minutes in, which basically you can't do too much. But it'd be ideal, I reckon, if you had a training run there to get used to it, because as Ewan said, geographically it's a hard thing. You're in the middle of space. You don't have the fences. You don't have the grandstands, and you just got to get used to it.
You mentioned a consequence test match, and obviously there's the rugby side of it, but there's the off-field side of it as well. The selection will take place earlier in the week. How do both of you think about preparing teams and trying to get them ready so as that by the time the game starts, they either haven't played the game already and that they are absolute, at their peak at that particular moment at 8 o'clock on Saturday night? How would you be thinking about managing the week and managing the preparation? Obviously, the football has to be done, but what else are you doing during the week to try to either move Australia to the point where they're going to be able to stay in the contest at 1-1, or from a Lions point of view, how do you get them to the point that if they do finish the job on Saturday night, the series is won? You and McKenzie.
It's about confidence. Obviously, coming off a loss is not ideal, but it's been done before. You need to, if it was me, I would have had this selection sorted. I would have the selection sorted yesterday. The players would have known this morning you'd already be practicing whatever specific tactics are going to be relevant. So you've got to give everyone the maximum opportunity to be ready for the next game. So there's no confusion, whatever. So you need to be super confident. This circumstance, they're all going to be looking to the coach to lead, basically. So you've got to be super confident in yourself that you've got a strategy. You've got to sell them a winning strategy, okay? Because you just come off a loss. Even though the scoreboard was kind, it probably felt worse than that. So you've got to sell them something different, because whatever you said a week ago, it's probably got to change a bit.
Mm. But as you go through the week, though, what sort of signals are you looking for from the team and from your senior leaders and others that you're getting it right, that you're moving towards that appropriate and best possible preparation?
You don't know that you're going to get it right, but you've got to be able to sell it to them and convince them that it makes sense. And then obviously the leaders in the team are going to be the ones that sell the strategy, make it happen on the training park, and they've got to be believers as well. So that's what's really important. You've got to be able to convince them that whatever we did last week, that's not relevant anymore. This is what we have to do this week, because now we've played them, we've got this knowledge, we see how they play, we see how they played us. So here's some things that we can do. And, the players have got to take some ownership of that as well, but you've got to sell it to them first. So it's a busy day, Monday. Tuesdays, obviously, you're getting stuck into it. There's heavy work going on there. And then you want to be repeating things on Thursday, Friday's repetition. So Monday's a very busy day. They'll be very busy today, selling a strategy and selling a selection scenario that's going to do the job.
And for you, Eddie Jones, how do you know whether you're getting it right or you're not getting it right as you work through the week?
Well, the thing is, you never know, mate, or you'd never lose a game. Like, it's as simple as that. You never know, but you got to try to do all the things right. Like we played Wales in the 2 tests, so we won the first test. So I decided to change things. I decided we train on Sunday, have a short run on Sunday, because I just wanted to touch on things we wanted to do well and then give the Monday off. And we had 2 really good training days, Tuesday, Wednesday, where physically they were good. But in the end of the day, we didn't come out of the blocks. And then you look at your preparation, you look at your messaging, what didn't I get quite right? And sometimes, like in these games, the reality is that Australia is going to lift their intensity. You know, and as Lions, you know that. You know that as the coach, right? And you're trying to get your players to a higher intensity than they were last week. But there's less inclination for the players to go there because, like everyone, we get comfortable. You know, that's just human nature. But the Australians, it's easier for them to get up. And then as Ewan said, you got to channel that aggression, that want to win into a cohesive tactical plan. And you've got a short period of time to weave that in, which is, as Ewan said, your Monday, and then you're trying to do that under a bit of pressure on Tuesday and Wednesday, etc. So it's a $64 question in coaching, mate. You know, you never know. You just got to try to get the right process in place, keep building on it. But the senior players are enormously important. You know, how they work as a group, how they can smell the room, because they smell it better than you do. You know, because you're not in there all the time, but they can smell if there's a bit of complacency or there's not enough focus, there's a bit of lack of focus, you know, and so the coach is working with the senior players to try to get that right temperature in the room.
And if you sense that, or if the senior players come to you and say, you know, I don't think we're right here, what sort of calculations do you make to make changes during the week? Or do you feel that, you know, you've got a plan on Monday and really that's the plan that's going to roll out regardless of what are the signals that there might be that things aren't quite right? Ewan?
Well, I think, as I said before, you're already working with the senior players, so Monday's the day where you get rid of any confusion or any doubt or any you give everyone an opportunity maybe to talk about or introduce ideas, but in the end you've got to settle on something and move forward. So you don't want to be the only thing that might change is their selection, which might pop up, and whether you do anything different because of that, but you try and anticipate the selection, you try and anticipate the refereeing performance. So you try and take everything out of play so there aren't any surprises later in the week. Then it's just about whether you can impose your strategy or your game plan on the opposition. And that's where they've got to, you know, the players have got to rise to the occasion as well. Eddie makes a really good point. I mean, if Australia will get up for this second test, the circumstances are all in their favour. It wouldn't surprise me if the Lions tweak their team just to try and keep everyone focused. They might tweak because they've got depth. So they might do that, but that might backfire. You know, who knows? So we'll see. But today, they'll be busting a gut today trying to get all of the thinking and cerebral part of the game right. They'll be doing walkthroughs, the line-out strategies, all of that stuff, because they already know the team. The team will already be settled, so they'll know what they have to do at line-out time, etc. And then they'll be putting it under pressure tomorrow and, you know, Thursday.
So, Eddie Jones, what happens this weekend? What do you think is going to happen this weekend?
Well, I think Australia's going to be in a position to win the game at some stage. I think if you look back at last week's game, there was no stage where you thought Australia could win the game. And that's the disappointing part, you know. But there was, you know, even though it was the end of the game, there was some rays of hope there. They've got to build on that. They've got to try to find a way to make that more part of their game, a more natural part of their game. Because, you know, at the moment it looks like they play a very, very structured game. And they've actually, I reckon, you know, as we've spoken about, got to break the game up. And whether they can do that in their current sort of system of play, that's the $64 question. But I think they'll be in the game at some stage. Because the other thing I'd be looking at, if you were Australia, at the end of the game, the Lions look visibly tired. Like Itoje at one stage couldn't pick his feet up. Now, he kept going. And they're coming on the back of 30. They've already played 30 games. They've played now 4 or 5 for the Lions. You know, they'd be up to 34, 35 games. And there's a stage on the tour where the tank is going to be pretty empty, you know, and they're going to be relying on their mental resilience to pull them through. But they look physically tired at the end of the game. And so if you can bring that out a bit earlier, get the game up and going a little bit earlier, which Australia's got to take some risks to do that, then they'll put themselves in a chance to win the game. So I reckon at some stage there'll be a chance to win the game, mate.
But do you think they will win the game?
Well, mate, I don't know. On current form and what I see, no. But I think they can put themselves in a position to win the game, which then gives you a chance, mate. Because they've only got to make a few mistakes, the Lions, and you just look at the game again on the weekend. The error rate of the Lions compared to the error rate of Australia was much less. You know, they did the simple things well. Yeah, you look at that try. I think it was Tupou's try. Just their precision of their breakdown, clean outs, whereas Australia's were a bit sloppy in that area. You know, and they're the key parts of the game where you can build on your momentum or not build on your momentum.
Okay, you and McKenzie?
Yeah, I always believe that there's every chance to win the game. I mean, show me the two teams and I'll give you a better assessment, but I think there's enough opportunities to be able for them to impose themselves. It might be a little bit simpler. It might be a bit direct. As I say, we talked about short side and but it depends on who they pick. You know, you've got to be able. One thing's having the theoretical plan. The other thing's having the players to execute it. So matching those two together in a week is the coaching challenge. But it always has been. That's the way it is every week. You know. So, and you see lots of occasions where teams turn it around in a week. So I don't see that Australia can't impose themselves if they can get at the lines, get ill discipline into the game, milk a few penalties. You got a yellow, you got a Latin referee, someone's in the bin. Things change real fast, you know. So, but you got to hang on to the ball and put some pressure on to do that, you know. I think Australia can.
So last week before the program, I was like, there's no chance we can win this. And then I listened to you two and I got all excited. And then I watched the game. I got disappointed. Now, I was coming in here today. I was demoralised again. Now you've talked me around again, but I am going to Melbourne as a fan. I've got my gold ready to go, 90,000 plus at the MCG. Wonderful occasion. And let's just hope, you know, that the series can, you know, light up with a great performance from an Australian team, because I think it'll take every bit of that to knock over what is a very talented Lions team. So we will look forward to that. And later in the week, both of you will be back as we preview the game on Friday, when we do know just exactly what those teams will look like and we can get into a little bit more detail. But gentlemen, over the weekend, plenty of good rugby played. Argentina 52, Uruguay 19 in the Salta province in the north of Argentina. Some pretty impressive performances. I thought, okay, it was Uruguay, but Elizalde, I think his name is, the fullback from the Bristol Bears who's playing for Argentina. He had a pretty handy day, so did Cruz, the fly half. What caught your eyes over the weekend? You and McKenzie, what else did you see at the weekend?
I didn't see a lot, Pemby. I didn't see a lot. I cracked my tooth. I've just had my tooth extracted 2 hours ago, so I've had a pretty ordinary weekend. So I didn't watch as much as I'd like. So yeah. I can't enlighten you on that front. But
South African under-20s were also pretty impressive in beating what was a very gallant New Zealand team. Again, my mate Hashim Peed was exceptional at a halfback. Albie Bester, their number 12. They're just it was a fantastic game of rugby. Eddie Jones, what did you catch over the weekend?
I watched the New Zealand-France game, and that was a bit like watching, the movie Psycho, the Alfred Hitchcock. The woman has a shower. You know what's going to happen next. The bloke comes, and it was the same in that game. You know, France, valiant, young team, young kids. Played well, stuck in, but in the end, the consistency of the All Blacks was just too much for them. And they won the game easily at the end. And I watched a bit of that South African, New Zealand under-20s, and just you think about the simplicity of South Africa's system. You know, they've got these great private schools that basically they have good coaches, good S&C. They have A, B, C, Craven Week, where all the best schools play. Then they go through the under-20s. The under-20s then play, and then they come through the Springboks. And the Springboks have created a team in Europe. The domestic teams are playing in Europe. They've still got the Currie Cup. And they just at the moment seem to have their development system right. And that's the big challenge for other countries. How can they optimise their talent development? Because South Africa seem to be doing it. England are not too bad, and France are doing really well. And Ireland's another great example of where, they've basically got 15, 16 private schools feeding into the Leinster academies that produces 80% of the Ireland team. And we've seen the quality of the Irish players. The other thing I reckon we shouldn't, without saying, is the performance at Gibson Park, mate. Like, how good was he? Like, how square he approaches the breakdown. He's always checking the short side. His pass selection, his kick consistency, and that's just come through hard work at Ireland. Like, he was absolutely outstanding.
Pemby, I did watch that New Zealand-France game because there was an old Sua'ali'i who played tight end prop for France. I coached him back in 2009. So they dusted him off. They dusted him off for the tour. So I did watch that game to see how he went, and he was industrious. But one thing that did strike me in the game is that the field goal was back. So France kicked one and he just missed the other one. So one thing about rugby is people forget things. They forget things that are available, tools or opportunities on the field. The field goal's just been forgotten, and it was back in that game. And but as Eddie said, it's France are while it's always you don't want to see uneven contests. France are the one team in the world. Maybe South Africa can do the same. They can send a B, C team out to New Zealand, and they'll give it everything, and that's just where they are. They've got players who are just talented. They just get out there and play hard, So, so that was interesting, the field goal.
So, Eddie Jones,
Australia,
a couple of weeks, Eddie Jones, you made a point the other week about the North and the South, and that really it's quite clear now that there's the Northern Hemisphere rugby is stronger than Southern Hemisphere rugby at the moment. Do you think that is having some sort of impact on the quality of New Zealand rugby at the moment? That their preparation is against Australia, and their players are only playing against Australia, whereas the Northern Hemisphere players are playing South Africa, England, France, Scotland, Ireland. They're playing in a tougher competition. Do you think that's having an impact on the quality of the All Blacks?
Well, I'd probably qualify that statement a bit. I'd say the consistency of the Northern Hemisphere teams is higher. And just particularly, I reckon the big area they've improved is around their breakdown. Their breakdown skills are much better than they used to be. And that used to be an area where New Zealand were above everyone else in the world. They were consistently the best breakdown. You think about when Australia's been really good over the last period of time, back to Rod McQueen's era. Their ability to make good decisions around the breakdown and execute their job at the breakdown was outstanding. And in that area, is New Zealand suffering? I don't think they are at the moment, but I think if they consistently lack really hard competition in that area of the game, then it might be a factor going forward. But it won't be for another 4 or 5 years.
What about your thoughts about that, Ewan? Well, I enjoyed the exposure. I've always been a believer of, if there's a good team out there, and we took this approach when I think it was at the Waratahs. The Crusaders were the best team at the time, so the idea was to try and get as many games as I could against the Crusaders. So we created a trial game series, so you could play more often against them. So in a way, you inoculate the players against the individuals. You get used to playing against them, and I found that personally when I played myself, that when you played against them, the hardest game was the first time you played someone. After that, it got easier because you got used to them, especially at scrum time and things like that. So I think that, I think Australia misses the opportunity to play against the South African teams. I enjoyed that because it was always a different contest, and I think that missing them in the super competition, I personally think that they added a lot, and so gave us more opportunity to think about the game and different ways to play, and obviously be able to match the physicality. So I think we've missed them.
And also sort of an England sort of BC team, 40 points to 5 in front of 20,000 in Washington at the Audi Field. Eddie, your views on England's end-of-season tour, 2 wins over Argentina, clearly an easy win for their reserves against the USA. England would have to be pretty happy about that.
Yeah, well, again, England's got good depth. You play a guy like George Ford with 100 caps who knows the game inside out. It's like having a coach on the field. And they've got some good young players coming through. That's never been a problem for England. You look historically over the time they've played tests when the Lions are on, they've done particularly well. And France are the same. So those really big France, England that have got quite depth in terms of their development pathways, tend to handle these situations pretty well.
And Ewan, looking at the Australian perspective there in terms of developing depth, what can be done to ensure that Australia has more higher quality players available for selection?
Well, we've obviously got a lot more competition at the in the earlier age group categories. The people that are player managers in their 14, 15-year-old players, siphoning them off to different codes. So, the battleground for us is very different, and so you've got to be able to present. You've got to be able to make contact with those people, but you've got to be able to present them with opportunities where they can touch and feel close to the pathway. That there is a pathway, and they feel close to it, and then they can see some opportunity, and also what we miss, when you see it more in the football in Australia with all the best players playing Europe, you miss those opportunities where young kids can actually shake hands, get a signature, whatever, because the big name players are somewhere else. So we have a very different competitive marketplace. So we have to be able to go and mix it there, and that's a challenge, because there's a lot of resources in the other codes. So. But it's always been the challenge. That said, it's always been the challenge for 100 years. And, we've been able to meet that in the past. But it has to be a focus, and it's got to be just consistently applied. We can't grab everyone, but we've got to be able to grab the right players.
And a final topic, really just to have a quick conversation about, is the fact that during the weekend, Alan Gilpin, the CEO of World Rugby, was obviously in Washington, and there's an article in The Guardian by Martin Pengelly, a very good journalist who covers rugby in North America for The Guardian. He was saying $275 million to be spent over the next 5 to 6 years on the community game, on the development of more digital content and social media, and indeed audience building, which is not just about taking one-off games to Washington and Chicago, but to get more high-quality rugby played in North America. Ewan McKenzie, Eddie Jones and I have spoken about North America in the past as we look to help secure the future prosperity of rugby union around the world. What's your views on rugby in North America and what can be done as the game builds to those very important World Cups in 2031 and 2033?
They've always had structures where they can, they've always had a national champion school level team and things like that. They've had pathways, but there's always been other issues at play. I mean, I have friends in the American scene, and you talk to them and they get despondent at times. But that's a big investment. It's a significant investment. So you kind of hope that they've got the structure to be able to impart that. I know there's obviously there's a league competition there, and hopefully that will flow through. But in the end, it's about providing something more than just a sugar hit. We've got to be able to get something. If you're going to spend that sort of money, you want to be able to get something that's sustainable. And I've looked at the American scene many times over the last 30 years, and it's sort of had it's been up and down, up and down. So you guys are probably better versed than I am right now to know. But hopefully it's, you wouldn't just spend that money if you didn't think there was, no businessman would spend that money if they didn't think there was something worthy at the end of it. So I think that's a good sign.
Well, we are going to see the strategic plan. Eddie Jones calls it the brochure, but it's Brett Robinson's producing the strategic plan, or he and obviously World Rugby, Alan Gilpin and the team at World Rugby, which we're going to see later in the year. So we'll be able to see under the bonnet as to where the $275 million is going to be spent, I think, in North and South America, because I don't think we can forget the importance of developing the South and developing that part of the world. I think it's really one market that needs to be looked at. So it'll be interesting to see just exactly where that money's going to be spent. And also Eddie's going to be taking his Japanese team to America soon for the Four Nations Championship over there. So that's going to be good to have someone on the ground on behalf of Rugby Unity to see what in fact is going on there. Because, 20,000 crowd, I think that's pretty handy. I think there were 15,000 there for the women's match, USA 31, Fiji 24, so not a bad crowd as well, ahead of the Women's Rugby World Cup later in the year. So let's hope things are heading in the right direction in that part of the world. Okay, gentlemen, well, thank you very much for your time once again. A very thorough review of the weekend as we look towards this very, very big match for Australian rugby, particularly in Melbourne this weekend. I am going. I can't wait to be down there, so I will be joining you on Friday for our preview from Melbourne, which will be very good. So I'll get to sample all of the atmosphere as we build towards the big game, but lots to look forward to. So a big thanks to Eddie Jones and Ewan McKenzie for joining us once again. Please keep the comments coming on YouTube and on TikTok. Very much appreciate the third voice and your contribution to the game. But for the moment, we'll be back on Friday. Please be kind to each other. My name is David Pembroke, and it's bye for now.